Tremendous honor for me to introduce you to Dr. Mallika Sarabhai. Dr. Sarabhai is a living legend in herself. She is many things I can hardly begin to describe, and I think everybody knows who she is. Actress, dancer, writer, activist, choreographer. She is the director of the Darpan Academy of Performing Arts in Ahmedabad, India, and she is the recipient of one of India's highest awards, the Padma Bhushan. The accolades can go on, but we don't have so much time. And actually, to draw her out, we have a little interview that we will do at this point. I'd like to mention that this institute was founded by Dr. Haridas Chaudhary, an Indian and a disciple of Sri Aurobindo. And Mallika ji has been on the governing board of Auroville for 10 years. And we are taking a group to Auroville this year. The aim of this institution, as founded by Dr. Chaudhary, was East-West dialogue. And today we can say that this has enlarged to East-West, North-South, the dialogue of cultures and traditions. And cultures and traditions that are oppressed and suppressed are not only things that we have to introduce to the West, but we have to also engage in an internal critique of these cultures. These cultures have their own patriarchies and oppressions. And releasing the spiritual power for all of humanity is really the aim that Dr. Chaudhary started this institution for. Towards that aim, I think Mallika ji is one of the greatest ambassadors of India for this purpose. And so, second great honor for us to have her here. Today's program will have two parts. The first part is going to be an interview, and the interview is conducted by our own Dr. Monica Mody, East-West Psychology doctorate, activist and feminist in her own right, and I will open the floor to her. After she interviews Mallika ji, we'll have a short break and then a performed lecture by Dr. Sarabhai. Thank you.
It's such an honor to interview. I'm really looking forward to just sharing conversation more deeply. So thank you for coming, and thank you for coming to CIIS. It's pleasure. Monica, something that I was really struck by was the very lineage of strong women that you come from. You can't hear with this?
Use the other one.
Yeah, just hold it close, I think.
One of them.
I'll use this one. That works. And if you can't hear me, just do this. But yeah, you know, the lineage of strong women that you come from, right from your mother, Mrinali Sarabhai, your aunt who was part of the Indian freedom struggle, your grandmother who was an activist in her own right, and your great-grandmother herself, right? And so I'm curious, what's been your relationship with this lineage, and tell us about some of these women.
You know, being brought up in the family I was brought up in, I thought all women were like that. And it gave us an extremely rude shock to find that that was not how women were supposed to be. And that all of these women had broken many barriers to get to the paths of truth and justice that they were on. There was a lovely story that I was brought up on about my Kerala great-grandmother. In 1820 or thereabouts, there was something that was called the Mapla Revolution in Kerala. The Maplas were the Muslim laborers who worked in the farms of the matriarchal Nair women. And apparently most of these farms exploited the laborers, so what's new, right? So the laborers decided that they would kill the farm owners, and this was sweeping across central Kerala, where my great-grandmother, a widow since she was 25, was farming. And so the neighbors came and ran and said, you have to flee because the Maplas will come and kill you. And she said, I have not exploited any of the Maplas. So let the Maplas come, and then if they think that I have been part of this exploitation, let them kill me. So she prepared a meal for 200 people. And when this sort of marauding tribe came in, she said, do come and sit down and have lunch, and then we will talk. And they were sort of completely aghast at this woman. And you must understand that in Kerala, upper caste women only wore a lower garment. It was considered to be titillating to cover your breasts, and only prostitutes covered their breasts to titillate men. So you can imagine this diminutive figure of maybe 40 she was then, with earrings that had brought her ears down to here, which was a sign of great beauty in Kerala. So she fed these 200, and then she said that I would like you to talk to the Maplas who work in my field, and if you think that they feel that they've been exploited, by all means do what you will. And of course the Maplas were extremely happy and said, no, we are treated like family, we are fed every day, and we don't want to do anything. And the marauders went on to the next farm. Now, this is a story I was brought up on since I was 3 years old. So there were so many such stories, including of one aunt on my paternal side dressing as a Pathan during the partition and going on a horse to take Muslim families back to their Muslim families in Pakistan, and to bring Hindu women back during the time when 1 million people were being massacred. And even today, the older generation in Kashmir remembers her as the Pathan of Kashmir. So, as I said, I didn't think it was special. And I thought that's how we were supposed to be. So that's how I was.
But it's so true what you say, like this is not the larger narrative that's outside, right? And so when you became a mother, how did you transmit this sense of strength to your daughter?
And my son.
And yourself, yes.
And my son, yes. In my family, there were no gender, caste, or religious differences. My aunts and uncles have married into everything from Greek Orthodox to Jewish to Buddhist and so on. So it was a very, very mixed family, although it started off being half Jain and half Vaishnavite. So religion was not an issue. Caste was not an issue because both sets of grandparents had been fighting against the caste system with Mahatma Gandhi and against untouchability and all of that. Then I went to the first Montessori school that Madame Montessori came and started, and was run by another aunt of mine, where even gender differences didn't exist. And in my own family, there were no gender differences. So boys and girls were brought up in the same way. When the family shareholding was being done for the industries, the men and the daughters were given exactly the same. So it was not till I was 14 years old and went into St. Xavier's College that I realized that the world wasn't that way. So I then of course I came across all the things that made me fight for justice. So when my own children were born, I was very conscious that I would consciously imbibe these values in them. That the world is different, and the world will say a father has to do this and a mother this, or that boys don't cry, or that girls don't play football, or whatever. And to consciously give them the arguments that they could put forth to their friends when their friends jeered at. So it was a very conscious effort of making them into gender bias free and caste bias free and religious bias free, because in many ways today's situation, the last 15, 20, 25 years, has become much more radically disenfranchising of the lower castes, of women. And the whole move towards right-wing Hinduism just underlines the place of the upper caste male as the decision maker, and the woman in the kitchen, and the lower castes doing the lower caste work. So the position has become much more radicalized now than it was in the post-independence period when I was born, where there was this great feeling of having to build nationalism and creating a new country, and we were the second generation of that, and it was a very different time.
This is, and it's really interesting, right? You use the concept of Shakti in this scenario, right? In a scenario where on the one hand there's radicalization of politics and right-wing politics, and on the other hand there's the push of secularization, and you consciously chose to engage with Shakti. What's that been like?
You know, India is still 80% Hindu. And Hinduism is the only philosophy in the world where the first being was not a bearded man. The first being was half woman, half man. So at the core of the philosophy is the scientifically proven DNA approved fact that we both have, all of us have, male and female portions. And yet patriarchy has seen to it. Patriarchy in religion, patriarchy in families, patriarchy in society has seen to it that the women's idea, the women's ideology, the fact that Shakti was brought into the battle against Mahishasura when all the gods failed, and that they said that we have failed, it's only your energy that will free the world from the menace of Mahishasura, meaning evil, or whatever you want to call it. We have reduced this, and like in many patriarchies, but especially in a patriarchy where on the one hand there is goddess worship, and on the other hand there is a very strong anti-woman bias in society. In India you are either a goddess or a whore, or a chattel. And this can take many euphemistic forms. But even in the most educated families, even in the most empowered families, you will still hear a wife say, you know, my husband is so nice, he allows me to do whatever I want to do. And it's not so different here. You are here in a country where you still don't have an equal rights amendment, where you still, with all your forward thinking on gender, daughters are still given away in marriage. Given away like pieces of dough, or like a gift to give to the man. So for me to bring Shakti in and reinterpret mythology in the terms in which I thought it must have been written, in the spirit in which it was the obvious thing to do. I do not want to go heads on with a philosophy that already has a very, very empowered female self there. What you need to do is you need to unravel the nonsensical rituals and very unfair and very unjust and very self-fulfilling packaging that has come down to us for 2,000 years. Because, think of it this way. For all of you who have studied or know something on Hindu philosophy, Krishna is called Radhe Krishna, Radha's Krishna. Vishnu is called Lakshmi Vishnu. Sita and Ram are called Sitaram. So there must have been a time when Ram was Sita's Ram and Sita was not Ram's Sita. So we just have to dig enough and take away enough of the layers of our patriarchy, of British Victorianism, of all the things that have happened. That continue making the powerful stay in power. And that means, in Indian context, it means the upper caste male.
Yeah, and this is, and I love that you're talking about the unraveling, the peeling off of layers that needs to happen. So it's not a reinterpretation of mythology, you're finding this in the very stories, in the very grounded being.
Let me give you a very small example. You know, all of you know that thousands of Indian women burned as satis on their husband's funeral pyre. Now the word sati first comes in the Mahabharata to describe a woman called Savitri, who was the only daughter of a king, brought up very liberally. The king says to her, go and find yourself a husband. So you're talking the Mahabharata, 3,000 years ago. So she goes off and she meets lots of princes, and in a forest she finds an exiled prince called Satyavan and falls in love with him. And the horoscope readers say you can't marry him because the 1 year after you marry him, he is going to die. And she said, it doesn't matter, time has little relevance. And of course, Aurobill follow us here, Lord Savitri, the flame of the forest. We have been told continuously that Savitri is great because she refused to live if her husband died. That she was willing to throw herself onto the funeral pyre if Satyavan died. Now this is nowhere in the Mahabharata. What is in the Mahabharata is that Savitri refused to let her husband die, went into a duel with the god of death and defeated him. So she was intellectually the superior and got the better of the god of death. Then you can't burn women. But this is the interpretation that comes to us even today.
When and how do you think patriarchy started coming in?
When agriculture became important, because when people were nomads, there was nothing to protect. The minute they started having agriculture, they needed to protect their land. If they needed to protect their land, strength became important. Somebody had to stay home and somebody had to go out. From all the sociological readings that I have read, that seems to be the beginning of patriarchy. It's a long time ago.
Right, and similar processes happened around the world, right? You talked openly about how when you did Peter Brooks's Mahabharata, something that you really took away from that process was that art and activism for you needed to happen together, that they were not separate, meant to be in separate boxes for you. So can you talk about that, like how that's evolved for you?
I will talk about it a little more when I'm actually speaking and showing you things. It really started many, many years ago when I was a child and I was watching what my mother was doing. And as early as the 60s, my mother was from South India, married into Gujarat, had to learn the Gujarati language and was learning it from the newspapers. And she kept reading about young girls in one part of Gujarat, in Saurashtra, soon after their marriage, killing themselves by jumping into the well. And she couldn't figure this out, so she started talking about it and was told that this was because the married family put a tremendous pressure on the girl to go back to her natal family and bring back more money in the form of a dowry. And because she couldn't go back to her family, because she knew how much the family had suffered in the first place in giving the gold and whatever else, she would kill herself. And my mother, whose primary language was Bharatanatyam and Kathakali, thought that this had to be brought forward. And she used Bharatanatyam, which was a form that spoke of love and spirituality and the beauty of life, for the first time in talking about hatred and violence. And actually, we are going to be showing you a fragment of that piece. So I had seen that it was done, but when I went into the Mahabharata, I had thought that I was prime example for other choreographers and directors to work on. I did not see myself as a creator. So therefore, I had not married the two. When I came out of the Mahabharata, I realized that unless I created for what I felt very passionately about, nobody else was going to create it for me. And seeing the reaction to Draupadi across the world to very, very different audiences, I was convinced that that's the way to go, and that what Amma had started 30, 40 years ago and what she had continued doing over the years was really where my work had to take me.
So I love that art is this like living force for you, right? And in some, you talk about how we really need to make it a part of how we even plan our future and even vision our future. Can you talk about that?
We're sitting here in an institute that talk of integral studies. You know, people tell me that art is like the cherry on the cake. And I want to say that if you really look at life, art is the yeast. It's not the cherry. It can never be what comes in the end. Unless we stop thinking of ourselves as consumers, which is what governments and big corporations want to make you, unless we go back to thinking of ourselves as humane beings, brought to this earth to do something other than buy and sell and think of mortgages, then art is the leavening force that makes that life worth living, that makes you listen to that bird call, that makes you wonder at the way that kangaroo jumps, that makes you wonder at the way that tree grows. All of that is art. It's not only what we do that is art. To be able to stop and smell the fragrance of the first rain in an Indian desert is to me bringing the same rasa that makes for rasika, that makes for rasa in art, that makes for rasa in rasoi, in cooking. It's the same, it's the salivating of the soul, the salivating of the mind, the salivating of the mouth, and all of those are art.
And it's so beautiful, right? Like in contemporary times, art provides us with a language that we can really use to talk about the big concepts of belonging and consciousness and our relationship with the cosmos, which I think we've lost, in some ways we've lost our ability to speak to those big concepts in a way.
And also, traditionally art spoke of those concepts. Traditionally for me, the art is to go inwards, to find that connection between the Atma and the Paramatma, for instance. But the fun of art is that it can talk about the most pedantic things and get to people to understand. And this performance that we are touring the country with, The Colors of Our Heart, which we hope you will make the big hike to Dublin to see, because I'm telling people if I could hike 13,000 miles from Ahmedabad to San Francisco, then you can make the hike to Dublin. My colleagues are here, I will introduce you, my co-director is here. But The Colors of Our Heart talks about issues that men and women don't want to talk about, especially men, but a lot of women. It talks about taking the narrative of gender, taking the narrative of breaking gender barriers to a period when we all realize that in the freedom of the other lies our freedom. And as we are going to show you an excerpt from it, but we do hope, I think there are information flyers on your chairs. If you're not sitting on them, then you can look at them. If you are sitting on them, you can get up and look at them. But so we hope you'll come there, but that's where I'm taking it.
Thank you. Years ago when I was a child, I actually studied Bharatanatyam, and I think a lot about the roots of Bharatanatyam, and it started off with the Devadasis, and they, in the temples, what they were doing was they were tending to the spiritual energy for the communities, right? So first of all, I'm curious, have you thought about like, well, I'm bringing this up because in some ways the Devadasis have become the others of modernity today, right?
There's a very, very lovely novel that has just come out, and I can't think of the name, but I will think of it, about tracing the history of a Devadasi family and trying to put the context back. Devadasis were the handmaidens of gods. In the temples, there would be a Devadasi who danced in front of the deity in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and whoever else came to the temple could watch from the back. But basically, she was dancing for the gods. Now, the temples invariably had one patron, and as the Devadasi system, as the monies coming into the temple dwindled, the man who was the patron took the Devadasi as his courtesan, or as his mistress. And when the British came and saw that, they thought this was this terrible, corrupt, notch girl system, which it was not. In some temples it was, and it had become very ugly. But they threw the baby out with the bathwater and they banned the style itself. And it was only in the 1920s that this amazing woman called Rukmini Devi Arundale, fortuitously married to a British baron, and therefore under the British rule had the backing of the British, who started the first institution of learning that was outside of the temple precincts, and started Kalakshetra in what is now Chennai. And brought back the respectability, and she was at the forefront. My mother, 15, 18 years later, they were the first educated women to try and take away the dishonor that the British had painted onto the style and say, the style is magnificent, just because the purveyors of the style fell into what you consider bad times does not mean the style is bad, and therefore it brought it back. But had it not been for the Devadasis, the style would have died. So we should be deeply grateful to them. Whatever the corruption that attached itself, that doesn't take away from the fact that they actually kept both Carnatic music and Carnatic dancing alive.
I want to talk about politics right now. And you've you've been pretty outspoken about what's going on in terms of Hindutva politics in India right now. You've done several interventions in many different ways over the years. And I'm curious, what have been some of your learnings through this process? How do we continue to make interventions?
I think right-wing politics and right-wing religions that we see an upsurge of everywhere, including this country, but it's happening in so many countries, comes from the politics of fear and fear-mongering and of breeding insecurity and of convincing populations that life is a zero-sum game and that if I take this much, then there's that much less for you. And in a time when poverty still surrounds us, when there are nations that are being beggared because other nations have intervened for no reason and are bombing them out, when migration is happening and there are millions of people who are striving for their life, I think it is right for people to breed hatred for anybody who is the other. And this line of who the other is can come closer and closer to us. It can once be language, it can then be race, then it can be color, then it can be part of your family that perhaps cooks differently. The point is that today we are a human race that lives on fear. We live on fear that somebody will shame us. We live in fear that somebody will laugh at us. We live in fear that somebody will take away our job, our car, our country, our this and that. And what we need to educate ourselves first is to say, what I was saying earlier, that we are a humane being, not just a human being. And we need to find that humaneness in us and to try and maybe, as parents, bring it to our children, to teach people to find the light from within and not let the darkness that everybody has brought rule our lives. There is light and darkness in each of us, but it is up to each of us to bring forth that light and say, I will not be overshadowed by this darkness. And that is in politics, that's in religion, that's in our daily lives. And that is a search, I mean, you're talking of Sri Aurobindo, that is a search of the philosophy. But each of us needs to become an active practitioner of it every day, because the entire world has coalesced to make us feel dark. And politics is just part of it. I think we need to actively engage within ourselves every day, and we need to actively engage in dispelling it in whichever way we can, in every moment, like my talking about it here, you're maybe talking to your friend in a cafe or on a WhatsApp conversation. Hello, how's your life doing today, honey? But it's something, we are at such a very, very, very difficult phase in the world, that unless each of us who cares actively engages in it, we have a very dark few decades in front of us.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, what this is doing is it's really inviting us to do this work more and more. And you were talking about the zero-sum game, and something that's also happened because of the zero-sum game that's become that's become the dominant mode of thinking right now, is that we've lost our relationship with nature, I think.
That's part of the dire straits that I'm talking about, that feeling with nature, that we have come to be convinced that individual capitalist power is the thing in life. And it can't be. It cannot be. That is such a beggaring of our purpose in life. And that's the problem.
And I was thinking of how you used the principles of coexistence with nature when Darpana Academy was redesigned. So it's in every facet of our lives, right? Like that it needs to come in. But I love that it for you it was also a spatial logic. So what was that like?
Well, my co-planner is sitting here, Yadavan Chandran, who's the artistic director of Darpana and also the co-director of this show and the co-writer. He and I were very clear that if we believed in life that is organic, from organic food to organic living to living with nature and being able to nurture nature, and if we were redesigning the amphitheater in Darpana, that we needed to make it a place where people could come and see that being green doesn't mean being old-fashioned. Being green does not mean going back to unhappy Indian village homes. That being green had to be savvy, that being green had to be designer savvy, it had to be technologically savvy. So we have built a theatre where every single brick is recycled from a brick that we broke down and carries the memory of 70 years of dance and theatre and music in its vibrations. The entire theatre is made with lime, which is an organic material. We don't have any cement concrete on it. We gather rainwater and that goes into and underneath the seating for cooling passively. So, and it is a spectacular space. Visually, it's a spectacular space. So everybody who comes there says, this was built with passive energy, this very trendy looking place. Now, unless we actually have places like that where people can go and see, unless you can go to a farm and have a delicious organic meal and not a measly one, you are not going to be convinced. So one of the things was that we wanted to have a technologically superb amphitheater which was green.
I love that, yeah.
You are all invited on your next visits to India, or if you make a special visit. It's in Ahmedabad. It's on the Sabarmati River.
You've been an active ally of tribals in Gujarat, and I'm curious about the relationships of reciprocity. I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of give and take. So what have you learned from those communities?
An amazing gender balance. And how that gender balance can go askew when they become civilized. They have such a rich, vibrant culture. And because in India, Bollywood is the dominant contextualizing culture, my mother and I, who were traveling into tribal villages, she ran the Gujarat Crafts Corporation. So she was constantly looking for indigenous crafts that could be made into things that contemporary users would use. So with her in 1980, I was going into what we thought was an extremely far away tribal area in the Downs. And while we were there and she was looking at their embroideries and their button embroideries and so on, we were there in the evening, and to honor her, they started doing their tribal dancing, and we discovered that they were dancing to Amitabh Bachchan Bollywood songs. And coming from an arts institution, we thought, we thought that the autochthonous dancing and music of this country is very safe. It's obviously not. So we started a department in Darpana called Janavak, which means the voice of the people. And we started bringing in families, not experts. We started bringing in families from different autochthonous groups to come and spend a month with us, to explain their lifestyle, to explain their sociology, to explain their dancing and music in the context of their lifestyle, not as items, but as we do this as a rite of passage when the harvest comes in, etc., and things like that. And through that, we started archiving, we started giving back to them. When they saw that we were then taking it across the world and saying that it came from them and this is the reason why it came from them, they started feeling more self-worth. But it's a losing battle. It's a losing battle because Bollywood is so pervasive. And because rejecting what your tradition is considered upwardly mobile. But luckily, we have other people who are not of the autochthonous groups who are interested in continuing this.
What are some of the ways in which we can, and I know that, I'm like, okay, I'll ask one more question and then I'll open it up to the audience.
Perhaps we should open it up to the audience after we have shown what we want to show and shared that. You ask your last question.
Well, I think a lot about tradition, especially in the context of India. Like you said, there's Bollywood, there's you know what, I'll file away this question for now. My last question to you is going to be something else. If there is something that you could pass by way of legacy to the younger generation, as a guru, what would you want that to be?
I don't consider myself a guru. I don't think I'm there yet, and I don't. I think a guru is so much more than a teacher. I'm a teacher, but I do not have the kind of bandwidth that a computer has today, but that my gurus had, so that you ask them one question and they will find 55 other references. My dancers don't go away, you have to dance. Pooja, we are about to get you to dance.
That's why I'm getting everybody.
There is a bandwidth required for whom I would call a guru, and that is the knowledge and the memory of that knowledge, that you ask them one question and they bring out 55 different references from across, and I don't think I have it. I don't believe in legacies. I think if somebody is to be inspired by what I do or what I am, they need to find out what they need to get from that, or not. I am too into living now and trying to figure out what this moment means to think of either a legacy or gurudom.
Well, thank you so much, Monica.
Pleasure. Jonathan, can you move the chairs? The big topic was, do you need a break?
No.
If you can move this also slightly to the side. What is tradition? Is tradition something that got frozen 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Is tradition something that you have to dust out of your glass cabinet or pull out of a museum and look at the validation of? You know, I think we in India are extremely fortunate that we live in about 15 centuries on any given day. And we miss it. We miss it in the sense we miss the point. Because India is highly modern. I mean, most of your engineers and IT professionals here are Indians. And we have the same in India. And yet there is not a single day when most of us will touch upon something that has been handed down several hundred years. But we are out of touch with it. We do it often as a ritual. To me, what I am doing just now is probably going to be called a tradition in a few years. To me, tradition is being rooted, having bare feet on the ground, with the roots knowing that irrespective of where my branches will go, where my thoughts will go, I remain rooted and I take from those roots the nourishment that I need for the core of my being. So when my mother created this piece talking of dowry deaths, using Bharatanatyam, which has at least 1,000-year history, and using the onomatopoeic syllables of a drum that we call shullas, and we teach with. They are never used on stage. They are taught, they are used as a part of the teaching of a style. She felt that language, whether it's English or Tamil or Hindi, was too limiting to transmit something to an audience, and that you could use sounds rather than words to be able to transmit an emotion. So for the first time, she broke away from the use of lyrics in any language and imbibed these onomatopoeic sounds with emotion to be able to get through to an audience. The dancing is the most classical Bharatanatyam you can imagine. The context is the context of then and today, because we still have hundreds of dowry deaths. And the use of sound was in the 60s radically different and remains today rarely used. In Darpana we use the context a lot, but otherwise it's rarely used. So this is a small fragment of this piece on dowry deaths called Memory is a Ragged Fragment of Eternity. May I introduce Pooja and Sonal. I will introduce the rest as they come. Yeah, can the screen be retracted? I will later, but for this we need the... Now for instance, that Bharatanatyam, we always begin Bharatanatyam with that. Have any of you got any idea of what that little ritual actually means?
Thanking Mother Earth.
You are close. It is saying to Mother Earth, forgive me, I'm going to stamp on you very hard, but that is my way of celebrating you. You were close.
Jump, that jump. Takadimi, takajulu, takadimi, takajulu, jump. That jump. Takadimi, takajulu, takadimi, takajulu, jump. That jump. Takadimi, takajulu, takadimi, takajulu, jump. That jump. Takadimi, takajulu, takadimi, takajulu, taka 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 taka. That jump, 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 that jump. Taka dimmi, taka takita, taka dimmi, taka takita, taka dimmi, taka takita, taka dimmi, taka takita, taka dimmi. Takadimi, taka, takita, 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 takadom, takadom, takadom.
Onomatopoeic syllables, but imbibed. Could you understand? Yes, you could understand. So that was one very radical, very, very early experiment with using Bharatanatyam, the traditions of Bharatanatyam, the strengths of Bharatanatyam, and yet taking it out of its context and taking it elsewhere. Now we'd like the screen back. Yadavan, shall we show them a small fragment of Devi Mahatmya? Or anything else that... Okay. Monica was asking me about Shakti. Shakti is the female energy. Shakti is the kinetic energy in all things. We say in India that Shiva, without Shakti, is Shava, which is a dead body. That it's only when the static energy of Shiva combines and mixes equally with the dynamic energy of Shakti that being happens, that birth happens, that nature happens, that nurture happens. And I have always been very, very fascinated as a feminist, but since 5, I mean, I didn't even know what feminism was, but I was always fascinated by this concept of a kinetic energy. And in 2001, I was going through this sort of lull phase, thinking, you know, what am I going to create? I don't know what I'm going to create. When my mother sent an envelope addressed to her that had come from America to me and said, I think this is something for you. And in it was this book called Devi. And it was by an American professor called Suzanne Ironbiter, who works at Stony Brook in New York, and who had, in the Sufi and Bhakti tradition, which is where you actually address prayers and songs to the god or goddess who is your favorite, but you end it always with saying the name of the writer and asking, and Meera asks, will the Lord ever come to me? Or Kabir says, everything is a mirage. So this is the Sufi and Bhakti tradition. And Suzanne Ironbiter had taken the main tome of Mother Goddess worship and had rewritten it as this dialogue between herself and the goddess. Where, for instance, she says to the goddess, she says, I am on a raft floating on the river, and I want you to know where my raft will go. And the goddess answers and says, Suzanne, your question is wrong, for you are the raft and you are the river. You are the flow and you know your destiny. So it was this, and I got fascinated by this. And Yadavan, as a filmmaker, had just moved to Darpana. And I said to him that I would love to use technology and the large canvas of a form like Kathakali, which has these huge headdresses and big makeup and so on, but do something very contemporary. So I worked with a pop group who had just won the American Pop Competition. It's an Indian group based in Ahmedabad called the Hammersmiths, but they had just won this international competition. Being Anglo-Indians, they knew nothing of Hindu philosophy. They had never heard of the Devi Mahatmya. So we went through 7 months of my trying to educate them and inspire them with these words to create this piece. And I'm just going to show you a small fragment, because that to me is also trying to take a tradition and expanding it into everything that was at my, on my palette at that time. Do we want to shut off these lights? Perfect.
There are wars in the minds of men. There are wars in the mind of man. This is that story. It begins deep inside, words follow words, I can't find the meaning. I give my daughters food, I smooth their beds, why are they growing? Is there a goddess in us who is the way we are? Fast, slow, repeating. I reached the end of a time. Childbirth is gone, parents gone. I fell in the sleep that comes between times. I surfaced a while. People talking, I amongst them. The sound of our voices, the stuff of our bodies were waves passing through us. The wars begin in the watery age. Before Earth was. I am there in the dark waves. I sleep in a place where life is beginning. Of holding on, 3 eyes, a dark blue radiance. Draw yourself out of this body. You have put to sleep here. I'm real to me now, and what I see is real. I see the two demons, their mold-rimmed eyes, their ashen skin, pale lips, reptilian cold. Breath of acid. I fight them down 5,000 years. That was all in the days when the world was water. Worm Spirit says slyly, kill us on the spot where the earth is dry. I raise my loins out of the water, standing the demons on the land, my thighs form. I cut their heads away.
It's a 1-minute promo that you will see, but it'll give you the idea, and then I will introduce you to the fellow artists who are doing it, and we'll do a short excerpt of that for you. Yadavan, do you want to show the... We have the lights down again.
So hard to give, so hard to take. These words of love, these words of hate. So hard to give, so hard to take. These words of love, these words of hate. Words can free her, words can keep her in a place. Words can free her, words can keep her in a place. It's not the color of a heart, it's the color of a face. It's not the whisper of a dream, it's the roar of a race. It's not the color of a heart. What must be wrong cannot be right. No shades of gray, just black and white. What must be wrong cannot be right. No shades of gray, just black and white. Words may heal you, she may die in their embrace. Words may heal you, she may die in their embrace. It's not the color of a heart, it's the color of a face. It's not the whisper of a dream, it's the roar of a race. It's not the color of a heart.
So that's the performance that's on in Dublin, not Dublin, Ireland, this Dublin here, on the 31st, and we hope you come. Let me introduce you to the rest of the company. Samia. Samia Malik is the lyricist and singer who sings live. She's from Britain and as much of a feminist activist as I am. Pooja and Sonal, you've already met. This is Meraz, and this, doing her hair, is Surbhi. We are going to be doing one song, and it's called We Sinful Women.
औरतें हैं हम औरतें गुनाहगार हैं गुनाहगार हैं गुनाहगार हैं ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं जो अहले जबा की तमकन्नत से ना रोब खाए ना जान बेचे ना सर झुकाए ना हाथ जोड़े ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं।
नाम लक्ष्मी अग्रवाल, शहर लखनऊ, उम्र 25 साल। गुनाह गली के आवारा लड़के को शादी से इनकार करना। सजा मुंह पे एसिड फेंका गया। उसका जवाब एसिड अटैक जैसे खौफनाक जुर्म के बारे में लोगों को जागृत करना, खुलेआम एसिड बिक्री के खिलाफ कानून के लिए लड़ना। मैं हूं लक्ष्मी अग्रवाल।
We sing for women who are not caught by false splendor. We don't sell our lives, we don't bow our heads, we don't fold our hands together. We sing for women.
Name Jyoti Singh Pandey, City, New Delhi, age 23. Sin was out with her male friend around 11 p.m. and therefore rape worthy. Punishment to be picked off the road, gang raped in a bus, and have a rod pushed in her vagina. Her response in death inspired the largest gathering of women and men in India to protest violence against women. I am Jyoti Pandey. I am Nirbhaya.
ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं कि सच का परचम उठा के निकले तो झूठ के शायरा में अट्टी मिली। हर एक दलीज पर सजाओं की दास्तानी रखी मिली है। जो बोल सकती थी वो ज़बानें, जो बोल सकती थी वो ज़बानें कट्टी मिली। जो बोल सकती थी वो ज़बानें कट्टी मिली। ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं।
Name Priya Ramani, age 38, City, Mumbai. Sin being alone in a hotel room with a man for a job interview. 20 years later, naming him for sexual advances in the Me Too movement. Punishment becoming the accused in a reverse defamation case filed against her by her powerful perpetrator. Her response: to continue to speak up despite constant trolling and great pressure, to inspire 20 other women to say Me Too about the same man. I am Priya Ramani.
We sing for women who come out raising the banner of truth against barricades of lies on the highways. We find stories of persecution, we find tongues which could speak have been cut out. We sing for women.
नाम एमा सुल्कोविच, उम्र 24 साल, शहर न्यूयॉर्क। गुना अपने यूनिवर्सिटी के दूसरे विद्यार्थी द्वारा रेप होना, उसकी शिकायत अधिकारी से करना। उसका जवाब: जिस गद्दे पे रेप हुआ उसी को लेके पूरे कैंपस में घूमना और लड़कियों को मैट्रेस लेकर रेप के खिलाफ आवाज उठाने के लिए प्रेरित करना।
I am Emma Sulkovich.
ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं कि अब रात में रात भी आए तो ये आंखें नहीं बुझेंगी कि अब दीवार गिर चुकी है, कि अब दीवार गिर चुकी है, इसे उठाने की जिद ना करना। ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं।
Name, Gauri Lankesh. City, Bangalore. Age, 48. Sin, to speak and write about religious hatred, bigotry, and superstition. Punishment, to be constantly threatened and finally to have a bullet put through her head. Her response, to let her writing continue to inspire all of us who fight against violence, bigotry, and hatred. I am Gauri Lankesh.
We sinful women, even if the night gives chase, these eyes shall not be put out, these eyes shall not be put out, and the waters can know to try to build it up again. We sinful women,
ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं जो अहले जबा की तमकन्नत से न रोब खाए, ना जान बेचे, ना सर झुकाए, ना हाथ जोड़े। ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें, ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें, ये हम गुनाहगार औरतें हैं।
Samya studied North Indian classical music in London, and she too has taken from the tradition and is going elsewhere with that tradition. So I would like her to speak a little bit on that journey.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your response to that piece. It was my first composition, and those were not my words. Those were written by somebody who, when I met Mallika, we realized we both greatly admired, an amazing poet called Kishore Naheed, who wrote in Pakistan. All her life she's been in exile, she's been in prison, but she has carried on writing, so a real inspiration for me. I grew up in England though. I went to England when I was 6, and I still write Urdu like a 6-year-old, because obviously in England, you know, I was learning in English, not my first language. I always had a love of music, and always, possibly like Mallika, always had a hatred of inequality. And it seemed natural to want to study music, especially when I saw a lot of inequality around me. I come from a Muslim background, I come from a Pakistani background, I was an immigrant. I saw the National Front marching down my road when I was about 10, and I've written, my first pieces were about racism as well as sexism, because all of those isms are equally evil. And I think in some ways I feel like the situation now is much worse than it was when I was younger. I'm now going and working, teaching songwriting skills all around England in women's refuges, working with women who are going through domestic violence, trying to get them to use the power of art. Because for me, the reason I make art, the reason I sing, is because it has saved me so many times from being a 20-year-old woman pretty well locked in a house, reading a book by Amrit Wilson called Finding a Voice, and realizing that I wasn't the only Asian woman in that situation. It gave me the courage to leave. Many years later, I met her when I was singing, and I told her how inspiring that book had been for me and how life-changing possibly life-saving. I come from a culture where so many women don't make it. The statistics are shocking. And so I feel, you know, sometimes I've argued with myself that why? I did an art degree a few years ago, and I thought, why can't I just paint flowers? You know, why do I have to paint pictures of 6 feet tall women with hands on their, you know, like this with attitude? Because I have to. Because I don't think, I mean, I would love there to be a world where I don't have to. I would love it to be that we don't have to fight all these things that are happening, but actually the world is not like that, as you all know, and actually it's getting rapidly worse. So I think the work that Mallika and I are doing, and all of us are doing, and possibly you're interested in, otherwise you wouldn't be here, is even more paramount, even more vital. Art does transform. Art has saved me. It actually empowers so many people. It gives us a voice, voices that are not heard. The narrative that is the common narrative is not the only one we want. There are many, many more stories that we need to hear. And some of the stories that we tell in our show are exactly those unheard narratives. Thank you.
Questions, comments to any of us? My dancers, Samya, Yadav and I.
Sure.
Most welcome.
Thank you so much. I think it's very educative. It's also very disturbing that these things are happening and not enough people are hearing about it. You know, I just came back from India, and of course every day in the news, in the Indian newspaper, I would read something or other in a village, in a town, where women are being abused. With, you know, I don't want to even say what all the things are. I'm quite aware of that. Have you taken this show in India? And if so, what has the response been? And as a result, has there been any changes?
This show premiered, its world premiere on the 8th of March in Atlanta. So the American tour is the beginning of it. A lot of my shows, talking of issues, have gone, when we find the funding, have gone pro bono into schools and colleges to start discussions and a movement, and the response has been amazing. We are trying to find the funding to take this show so that we can go to different A, B, and C cities where we can do one public show to raise funds for a women's organization, and then go into colleges and high schools to show it and start a discussion on the whole gender and violence field. So we very much hope that we will get that funding from somewhere and be able to take it over the next few years because there is enough Hindi in it. It's a good mixture of both languages. One at the back.
Thank you so much. Your dance is very powerful, and also your stories. And I wonder, when I watch the women dancing, I feel like I want to join them in the movements, and it's very reasonable, and the songs with the narratives. So I wonder, in your tour or education in the schools, do you teach girls to dance? I feel that would be so engaging, like bodily engaging these stories.
In India, we do a lot of work with marginalized communities using dance, with people with disabilities using dance, with people with mental illnesses using dance. Usually on tour, we don't end up doing that, but you're most welcome to come to Ahmedabad.
Your first piece, where you had the two dancers who were fierce, they were scaring me up in front. Could you, what is an interpretation as to the meaning of that particular dance?
young women across the world are brought up in one family and then one fine day plucked from that family and dumped into another family and asked to adjust. And there are mostly the women of that family who don't want an intruder, who don't want the intruder to think she can take hold of the whole family and run it the way they do. And so the innuendos start, the sister-in-law and the mother-in-law, who do you think you are? Do you think you're going to get a husband who's besotted with you? And what did you bring to this family anyway? Have you seen the way she looks? And just look at her, she thinks she's very pretty. Have you seen it? So this is her entering her new home and the reception she gets, the innuendo, the talking behind her back, till it comes to violence. And then it goes on about her trying to find herself and finally giving birth to a baby and both of them jumping into the well and killing themselves. And the other women coming and saying, well, it's just as well, and walking away.
Would you repeat the title of it?
It's called Memory is a Ragged Fragment of Eternity. Anyone else?
I know that you get your inspiration from dance, art, and writing, and I just want to ask you, because your performance and the performance of your students are very moving, and I've felt it. When you wake up in the morning, I know that whether in vocation or rituals or what is it dance that you do in the morning when you wake up?
I have a confession to make. When I wake up, I take my many, many dogs and let them out into the garden. And then I have my me time, and my me time is really looking at the horrible newspapers and then retreating within myself and then starting my day with an hour of yoga and anything between 2 and 4 hours of dancing. But I have a strange relationship. I have a place which most Indian homes will have with brass figures of gods and goddesses. But I have a very particular relationship with each one of them. And my conversations with them have also been translated into songs which I dance Bharatanatyam to, and it basically says, who are you? Why do I believe in you? You're a little brass statue sitting there. And yet I feel attracted to you. Yet when I light a lamp to you, there is something in me that comes down. So what is it? Who are you? Because I created you. And it goes on in this conversation till I come to say, if I didn't believe in your power to make things better and to lead me to make things better, the insanity and violence in this world would drive me crazy. So I need to believe in the you that is in me. That's my morning.
Oh, thank you. I loved your dancing, and I'm so taken by your comments and your passion and what drives you. I guess my question was, we saw these beautiful women dancers, and of course you're promoting this empowerment for women. Do you have male dancers, and if you do, how do you bring them in that consciousness, and what is their role?
Their role is the same as ours. We have men doing women's issues as well. My son is a professional dancer. We have had many, many male dancers. I have created pieces. In that piece you saw several male dancers in the Devi Mahatmya piece. So it depends on the composition of the company at that time. It also depends on what I am working. This is about the first all-women's piece that I have created. And that was for a particular purpose. And if you come to the show, you'll see that the stories we tell are in fact our stories. They're not stories from outside. Each of the stories is what we have held as the most difficult part of our lives, the most shameful, the one we never want to visit, the one we never want to even consciously think of. Because we believe that it's only by taking away the fear of that fear that we can move forward. It's the fear of the fear that enchains us. And however tumultuous, like childbirth, the sheer agony of those hours. And then what happens when the child is laid on your stomach? It's very much like that with the hidden parts of our conscious and subconscious minds. And unless we go through that terribly painful process, we are not able to unshackle ourselves and go forward. So that is why this is an all-women's country. But yes, lots of men.
I too am so amazed by your breadth, your knowledge and everything, even though you say you're not there yet, but I think it's amazing. What I'm curious about is how much do you bring the Bharatanatyam piece into your performances, and how much are you incorporating modern and, with the activism piece?
I don't start by saying I want to do a Bharatanatyam piece about this. Something takes my fancy, takes my mind, and I say I need to create a piece about this. It might be a fragment I've read in the papers, it might be a visual I've seen outside the car window, it can be anything. And then I try and think of who I want to tell it to. Do I want to tell it to a niche audience? Do I want to tell it to a rural audience? Do I want to tell it to the influencers of the world in fancy theaters, etc.? And then that dictates what I use. And my modern dance has come very much out of Bharatanatyam and of the expansion of the body from Bharatanatyam. I have never learned Western dance. So the movement vocabulary that you see here has come out of my moving away, but with the roots. As I said, the branches can go anywhere, but the roots for me remain Bharatanatyam.
I love your approach to dramatic dance, and I also appreciated what you said about tradition being now, rooted in the past, but moving us forward. Focusing on your mention of the absence of our relationship with nature, the detachment from nature, and a detachment from interiority and the societal pressures that force us in those detached directions. I wondered if you could speak to the role of imagination.
I don't know about how children how children are encouraged to draw in this country. But in India, we are told how to draw. So if you go to 1 billion Indians and you say to them, draw a village scene, it's going to be 2 mountains and a sun rising from the mountain and a little river and a hut next to it. Do the Indians agree or not?
Yes.
So even there, the imagination is not allowed to flower. Somewhere, to be imaginative has become to be disruptive, to be disrespectful. So over the last 2 or 3 generations, the people who are imaginative, the people who dare to question, the people who dare to draw a face which is not aligned to the rest of the body, are the mavericks who are told, you don't know anything.
Well, which somehow you, through dance, have managed to overcome.
I had rather extraordinary parents who didn't feel that following any rules that anybody else did without actually examining those rules and saying, yes, this is a rule that my ethical matrix sits with, and only then accepting it. I was encouraged to be the maverick. I was encouraged to be disruptive. I was encouraged to be questioning. But I was very fortunate. Do we have any last question? Yes, Sarabhai.
So I just thank you for your comments, and I don't have a question, but I have another kind of creative way I want to ask you, not only by words. I want to a little bit dance, but if it doesn't make any sense for me, I will explain my words. But
dance your question.
Sure. I have what I can be your dance response. For example, that's India.
Shall I give my response? Thank you. Debashish.
Thank you. A warm hand of welcome. Please come up.
And as I said, order your Uber and get on to Dublin.
I do hope this is the beginning of a long relationship, and we
I
can
hope so,
invite you over again.
Indeed, it has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, thank you. And I'd also really like to thank Mike and Giti Hebel, who have sponsored this show for all our enjoyment. Thank you.
And their dog, who has blissfully slept through it. I was telling Mike and Geeti earlier that we have a lot of dogs in Darpana, and I tell my students that only if you go off rhythm or off key will they bite you. So this one didn't come and bite any of us, so we're okay.
Would you just tell us where else you're touring?
Yes, from here we are going on Saturday, we are in Irvine. Then the Saturday after that, on the 28th, we are in Seattle. On the 31st, we are in Dublin East Bay. Then we go over to the East Coast, and we are giving lots of these lectures and so on. On the 6th, we are at the Peabody Museum in Salem. On the 12th, we are at Syracuse University. On the 18th, we are in Washington, D.C. at the Freer Museum at the Smithsonian. And on the 19th of April, we finish with the show at the Ganesha Auditorium in New York City. Thank you all very much.